Hi, this is Dan Paul again, and welcome back to part 5 of Maya Rockstars. So, where we left off was we just wanted to play around with creating a bunch of different colored shaders for all these primitive objects. So, let's take a look at them and see what we can do now. So, one of the things we didn't really play around with too much was the other shader attributes of these objects. So, let's zoom in a little bit here. And let's just, for example, say I'm going to double click on the blue shader here, and that's only assigned to this one object here, which is the other sphere. So if you want to change the transparency of that object, you'll notice I can kind of go ahead and change that 50% if it's all the way up. The object doesn't completely disappear because we're seeing the specular highlight there, so we know that it's sort of a glassy object, but you can play around with that transparency on the objects. The other thing you can do is change the ambient color. Now the ambient color kind of it sort of balances out any light. So it's almost as if the object's color is so strong that the light won't affect it at a certain point. So usually you want to keep it black, but in some instances, if the color is not showing up enough or too dark, you might want to boost that up very slightly. And then incandescent is very similar, and it's more like a light bulb. So you notice that it not only becomes the color not only becomes stronger, but also becomes lighter. So it's not like it will affect other objects like a light, but it will sort of appear like a sort of a light bulb where it sort of has a very sort of a brightness quality to it. It won't necessarily glow. That's another aspect we can add to it, but it will sort of become sort of appear almost as a light source, even though it won't affect other objects as a light source, and will cancel out a light source if this brightness is too high. So we're just going to leave those alone for now. And let's take a look at creating some textures. So far, you notice I've kind of added a material to everything but the floor. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new material for the floor. So we'll go ahead and say Fongy again. I'm just using the very standard shaders here. And so, Arnold, if you look at some of the shaders there's some specifically designed for the Arnold renderer. Right now, we're only doing I'm only going to use the Maya software. So far, everything we've been looking at is in hardware view, but we're going to soon use the Maya software renderer. So before, we clicked on the color here to change the color, but we can also add a texture rather than using a color. So if we click on this little checker pattern here, we can go ahead and we can add a procedural texture here. So there's a number of procedural textures here. So, later I'll get into images and things like that. But right now I want to kind of look at just some of the very basic procedural textures there. So you notice I clicked on the checker, and so now I have this checker pattern here on this material. So I can drag that onto this object here and kind of just drag it on there. Now you notice I don't see any change. So you kind of might be wondering, well, did I even assign it? So the way to see if it's assigned is to right click here and say select object with material, and see now it's selected object with material. So I know it does have that texture on it, but I just can't see it. So one of the things I didn't go over yet is the display modes in Maya. So there's several display modes. So if you hit the number 4, for example, you're going to be in a wireframe display. You're only going to see the objects as a wireframe. If you hit 5, you're going to see things in a shaded view. So this is going to show you the shaded view rather than the wireframe mode. But you'll notice I don't see any textures yet. So, but if I hit number 6, you'll notice now I see the textures. So those are the numbers 4 to 6. If we hit 7, we're going to see everything's black, because what we're doing now is we're looking at it in a light view. And since we don't have any lights in this scene yet, everything just sort of appears black. So let's go back to 5 so we can just, or rather to 6 so we can see the texture. So let's go back here and take a look at this shader here. So I'm going to pull the shader up here, and let's just double click on it. And we can go back. Now you can also pull up textures here. If I go click on the texture tab, you see I have this one texture here that is just the checkerboard. So you can view in the hypershade, you can view materials, textures, cameras, lights, various different things here. So there's lights, camera. We don't have any of these set. We have 4 cameras because we have the 4 views. Lights we don't have yet. Utilities. So we'll just look at textures from now. Now you'll notice that you can kind of change the colors of these. So if you wanted to change this to looking like maybe more like an old chessboard, you might want to go in and change this color down and make it a little bit more yellow or something like that. So I'd say done with that. So with procedural, it sort of generates a texture based on some sort of algorithm to place it on the object, and generates a sort of an image. Now, if you look down here on the tab here, it says UV coordinates. So UV coordinates is how many times we see this pattern replace, or how many times it repeats on the surface. So if I click on this little arrow here, I can open up another aspect of the UV placement. So the UV placement here, you probably heard of UV textures when it comes to placing usually images on objects. Right now we're just kind of looking at this procedural texture, and we can see that you can rotate the frame there, so I can rotate that image, and this would work with an image as well as a procedural texture. So you can see that I can rotate that image there. I can also control the number of repetitions here. So if you see the repeat of the UV here, it says 4. Now if I just did it at 1 and 1, and now it's just a 1-to-1 pattern, so you just see the 4 checkers there. But if I did say 8, I'm going to say 8 and 8, it's going to repeat on that surface 8 times. So there's a number of different procedural textures that you can use. And you can play around with those as well. But right now I just kind of wanted you to give an idea of how you can generate a really quick texture and place it on the surface. So let's move on to rendering in the next module.